Please welcome Josh Freifield, Chief Security Officer at Axon Tech.
All right, I'm Josh, Chief Security Officer of Axon Tech, as you just heard. Thank you all for hanging in to the end here. So let's start here. So P.T. Barnum once said, there's no such thing as bad publicity. A lot of us have heard this. But when we see this next slide, just a basic Google search of Colonial Pipeline, and you can see here that the CEO, Joseph Blount, is testifying in front of a Senate Homeland Security meeting. Trust me, that's not the circus and not the monkeys that he really wanted. On top of that, the other thing here is that if you look below this, none of the stories are about how they're performing or how well the pipeline's working, any of that. Trust me, it's all littered with these stories. The other thing you should see here is the CISA is under pressure to put more teeth in cyber requirements following this attack. So here's the thing, a lot of the regulations so far, such as HIPAA and HITRUST, I know a lot of you fall under that, basically they have been self-reporting, right? We check off the boxes on the controls, we're doing these things, we put it in, we certify it, someone signs it, but the reality is it's not really being tested. So now there's a new regulation called the CMMC, which all of the DoD contractors are going to have to follow. And that now has a requirement that a third-party auditor is going to check these controls and test them, right? So now you're actually going to have to do something about them instead of just saying you're doing something, and that's going to really change things. So we have to take this more, it's really something we really have to look at critically. Okay, so here's some examples of ransomware. Some of these are a little older, but the reason I put them up here is CryptoLocker, 52% of MSPs have reported this. I've seen that in the wild on multiple occasions, and that was one of the earlier ones, and I came into a company that was hit by this. They had only paid to back up their core database in the cloud, and they actually lost all of their Word, Excel, and other documents. Everything is gone. We actually had to recreate that network from scratch, and the only thing they got back was that database. So something to think about. The next one was WannaCry, 26%, but statistically we know that that was one of the widest, most number of computers were hit with this. And then DarkSide, which is the one the Colonial Pipeline was hit by, you'll notice something interesting. These earlier ones were 1 or 2 Bitcoins, small amount, maybe a couple $1,000s, few $1,000s. This one, the numbers they have on this are $30 million to $60 million later, right? So these have evolved. They've become a little more targeted along the way. Trust me, though, it doesn't mean they're not going after everyone. It's just that if you're a big fish here, you're going to get hit with a higher ransom. So here's some facts that are very interesting, and this is the thing. I hear this all the time. Oh, my company is small. We don't do anything that's really that big. But the truth is, every 11 seconds now, 11 seconds, in 2021, an attack is predicted of ransomware, okay? So we see these things like the Colonial Pipeline, the JBS, et cetera, and we think, well, they're big companies, it's not gonna happen to me. No, it's happening to small businesses. We see it, those of us that are in the trenches, and you really have to consider this. The next thing is $760,000 is the average cost of remediation. That's just to get things going again, okay? We're not talking about everything lost, which is the next one. $8,500 per hour is lost to downtime. The average amount of days of 19 days of downtime, and if you add those two together, multiply them, you'll see that's just about $1.3 million of revenue loss for one of these attacks, okay? And that's if you survive. A lot of companies don't even survive. So here's some statistics. Now you'll see that government has been the #1 hit target industry so far. And you'll see that healthcare and financial are kind of on the bottom. However, this is a little deceptive, and I'll tell you why. Healthcare and financial are actually hit with higher ransoms generally. As a matter of fact, the first ransomware attack ever was actually at the healthcare industry. Okay, so let's go over the attack timeline really quickly of the Colonial attack. So May 6th, the attack is launched, and you'll see something interesting in the next slide about this. But they first exfiltrated and then encrypted the data and demanded a $4.4 million ransom. So here's the thing about the exfiltration. These attacks now are called double extortion. So in the Colonial Pipeline, they exfiltrated 100 gigs of data, and they said, if you don't pay this ransom, we are going to release this. Now, who knows what that could have been? It could have been critical data about the pipeline, about their customers, whatever, but that's one of the ways that they're doing it, and they're telling you that if you don't give them the money, they're going to leave all your files encrypted, right? May 7th, with FBI assistance, they approve and pay the ransom. And then on May 8th, they actually announce it publicly, and they shut down not only their servers, but the entire pipeline as well, because they were worried that they might have damage in those systems. On May 9th, DarkSide, the organization responsible, they actually apologize because they apologize for creating problems for society. Well, I mean, that's so nice of them. Really gives you a warm fuzzy, doesn't it? They want to get your data, but man, we didn't mean to cause this kind of problem. Really nice. May 10th, the FBI announces them as the bad actor, which, you know, they probably had a clue there. And then May 12th, they come back online, issue fuel delivery guidance, but in the meantime, airlines had to divert flights, and the public was panic buying a lot of those bad decisions we heard about, right? So the attack vector, Mandiant, well-known firm, FireEye bought them. They were brought in to investigate. Now here's the interesting part. I mentioned this. You saw the timeline before. Suspicious activity had started on April 29th. That's a week prior to the actual attack, and that has to do with that exfiltration of data. They're looking at what's on that network. They're living in that network for quite some time before they even do the attack. Matter of fact, a lot of these attacks, the average can be 9 months that they're inside the network just getting data to do things. Now here's the most interesting thing. We know now that an unused but still active VPN support account had been utilized in this attack, right? So someone that was an IT person had this account to support the system, hadn't been turned off even though it was no longer being used. And we also know that that employee's password was found in the dark web, right? The most likely thing that occurred here is that they had reused their password on another site. That site actually got breached, the password was leaked, and they were able to use that here. So we'll go into some of that next. So here are the lessons. Actually, one other thing here. The consulting firm of Robert Smallwood delivered them an 89-page report in January of 2018. That was 3 years before the attack had been done. And they said a couple of things. In the report, it says they had a patchwork of poorly connected and secured systems. And also, he was quoted as saying an 8th grader could have hacked into that system. So again, probably not the publicity they wanted. So the 3 things we know were lack of process, right? The cybersecurity best practices were just not being performed here. Lack of training. The staff was not trained on security and password hygiene because I can almost guarantee that password was reused, and this happens all the time. And the ultimate sin was that they ignored the warnings to strengthen their cybersecurity. So this phrase, this is really great. William H. Webster, former director of the FBI, says, security is always seen as too much until the day it is not enough, right? But this isn't just money, it's also ease of use. So a lot of people don't put in security because it slows them down, it makes it difficult to get their job done. But the reality is we need to stop and think about this and make it as easy as we can. This is the meme du jour. You guys might have seen this, and this is kind of funny. So we've got Anakin on the left, that's Darth Vader. We've got Padme on the right, that's Luke and Leia's mother, right? And it says, I received your pen test report. So they paid to have another company come in, check the network, do this penetration test. And she says, and now you will remediate the findings, right? Nothing. At least the high findings, right? Nothing. Just like the Colonial Pipeline, I see this happen all the time. People actually have been told what to do, they just don't follow through. A lot of times they think that paying for the report is good enough. So you really have to go back and act. So speaking of which, act now. These are the things that I think are the strongest to do, the strongest support for your network. Multi-factor authentication, right? So something you know, such as a password, along with something you have, that could have stopped this attack. The next thing is privileged account management, and we'll go into that in a little bit. You want to identify your crown jewel accounts. Again, we know that in this attack, an admin account had been compromised. That should have been better protected. endpoint detection and response, and I put the response in capital here, you want to use, in our opinion, a higher level of service that's actually going to remediate for you, right? You're probably not going to have a 24/7 security operations center. Outsource that. Segmentation, at minimum at the network level, and the new thing is application whitelisting and ring fencing. These used to be in the enterprise, but they're now coming down and available for small companies to use. And then here's the main thing, really. You should have a discussion with your CIO or IT. Do we have the above? Do we have these things in play? Are we putting them in, implementing them? And what happens during an incident? Do we have a response? Do we have a plan, right? Really critical that you do this now. Okay, so identity and account management, these are really just password safes, the top one, but I gave some examples here. I use RoboForm, but you can store your passwords in there. One bonus, when you get those questions about what was your first car, whatever, put those into the password safe also and randomize those. Those can be used against you across sites too. On the enterprise level, we see a few here. Beyond Trust, Okta, One Login. These can be used to authenticate you not only on your own network and applications, but across all of your cloud SaaS programs. So here's the thing, in privileged account management, I actually specified Beyond Trust here mainly because it was on-premises servers that were attacked in Colonial Pipeline. I also happen to be certified, hey, extra bonus, right? So they say 80% of breaches are the result of privileged account abuse or misuse, 80%. And here are the things that the Beyond Trust could have done. It had multi-factor authentication, privileged account expiration dates, which would have helped here, session approval emails, so someone actually gets an email, oh yeah, Bob should be accessing the system, we'll allow that. And the restricted days and times. Any of these things could have helped in the Colonial Pipeline attack. And this is not an expensive solution to put in. We're talking thousands of dollars. Okay, additional jobs have come out. So we all know probably CISO now, Chief Information Security Officer. One thing though is, a lot of times I'll see the company say, oh, well, our CIO also doubles as our Chief Information Security Officer. This is a bad idea, folks. The goals are often divergent. The CIO is that guy that the CEO comes to and says, I want this, right? We heard about that. You get off the airplane, I saw this, I want this. He's a guy trying to innovate, put in those new technologies. The CISO is the guy that needs to, unfortunately, say, hey, wait a minute, that sounds great, but let's put a break on this and see what the security impact is going to be. And I hate to make the analogy, but in a way, it's sort of a good cop, bad cop thing. And the Chief Security Information kind of has to act as a bad cop to put the brakes on this and say, have we really thought this through from a security standpoint? And the other one is, a lot of you now, some of the companies are falling under multiple regulations. Sometimes you have to have a chief compliance officer. That's a new role because the regulations are increasing. You need to have someone dedicated just to stay on top of this, which is real hassle for companies. And again, that's going to get worse. So there are going to be more regulations and really more proving of regulations coming down the pipe. So here's where you might want to consider outsourcing or co-managing your IT. And there are a couple of different ways you can do this. One is with a managed service provider. You fully outsource your IT. Now, the differentiator here is their solution stack, right? Prices have gone up for this, okay? They used to be a lot less expensive, but the reason they've gone up is the security concerns have gotten so much greater, they have to put in better and more expensive tools, okay? So when you're doing your shopping, I'll tell you, like everything else, the lowest price is not always the best here for your security. And the other one is a virtual CISO, right? So this is the new word, the gig economy. So we have a fractional worker that's going to do this on an outside basis, outsourced basis, and they'll work with your CIO or IT team to put in the strategy to get you up to a better security level. Okay, so in summary here are the things that you need to consider. So process. You need to continually implement this. Security isn't something that you can just pay for one time. We see this threat evolving all the time. You need to keep doing the privileged account management and you have to provide the sufficient resources, right? Again, Colonial Pipeline was given the report that told them to fix things. They didn't take any action. This is a bonus here, frameworks. So there are a lot of great frameworks that have come about as this has evolved. A couple of them are the CIS controls. They're a nonprofit, generally vendor agnostic, so you can use that. And another thing is the new zero trust architecture. These can help you drive your strategy overall. Then training, we saw that this was a problem, right? Passwords had been reused, misused, whatever. So you need to train your staff so they don't fall for these phishing attempts or have any problems like that. And then again, if you're not able to do this on your own, if you can't create a team with a CISO and a few guys at the analyst level, let's say, you need to outsource or co-manage that. Only stay the course if you have the resources to build that internal team with a CIO and a CISO along with the staff. That's an expensive proposition, okay? Oops. Okay, and that's it. Made it quick, and I left time for questions. So does anyone have questions? Go ahead.
Yes? Okay. I'm developing a bit of a reputation, so my apologies. But I wanted to call you out on the lack of mention of the cybersecurity and asset management teams. In my experience, something like an unused VPN license would have been the first clue of a opportunity for a bad actor. Can you talk about your experience in working with an asset management or even a software asset management group and how that can help with cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to do an initial discovery, right? And in that initial discovery, we need to figure out all the hardware you have in place, all the software you have in place, user accounts, everything, your internet, your WAN, all of that needs to go into a system, and then that is actually going to drive a lot of your strategy. And it's true that I didn't include that, but the reality is I consider that as foundational, right? That's usually the first thing you're going to do in any kind of engagement is to take the lay of the land, because that's going to tell you, where are our problems, where are our gaps, and what do we need to do to get that moving forward. So you're absolutely correct. Again, I see that as foundational, and that's one of the first things you need to do. So thank you for that question. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Could you speak more to the responsibilities of a CISO?
Yeah, so again, the CISO is the one that's going to set the whole strategy for your security, right? They're usually the one that's going to implement new systems, technologies, from the basics like your perimeter firewall, your intrusion detection, some newer things like leak protection of security, Social Security being sent out the door. And then in a larger company, usually your CISO is going to have a couple of people underneath him, maybe a security architect, maybe a couple of security analysts. They're watching everything that comes through, right? Because one of the problems is, and I think someone else said this in one of the other sessions, you put in these tools like endpoint protection, right? Okay, great, I have antivirus, but it's alerting, right, all the time. And is anyone really looking at those alerts? Probably not. So those are the types of things that the CISO is responsible for, building that team that's really going to look at those alerts and act on them to adjust the strategy accordingly as things are occurring, right? That's kind of what the CISO does. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay, any other? Go ahead.
We often get involved when he's trying to find out why the people don't act.
Right.
You were given this report, it showed the risk, and yet you didn't act.
Correct.
And it's often an assumption that it won't happen or it won't happen to us.
Absolutely.
Do you have any recommendations of how can you wake them up? Is it about, putting down the consequences, financial and maybe even personal? What's your recommendation to get people to take action?
I mean, aside from taking them out back and slapping them around, I'm just kidding. So that's why I mentioned that one slide about every 11 seconds, right? Because again, you see these big things, but really you're correct. It's happening to all these companies and they don't act. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer except to say I think it's one of education, right? If you can tell people about similar companies, similar industries that have suffered from this, you just need to kind of drill it into their head with education that this is something you really need to consider, because the numbers, what you see on the news are just, the tip of that huge iceberg there that's going to sink your company. So again, my best answer here is just more education. Yeah.
We have time for only one more question so we can stay on schedule.
So again, and that's where I was saying, really, if you're too small for that, you should outsource that role to someone that can help you do that prioritization. That's where that virtual CISO can come in, work with your team, and of course, you mentioned the constraints, right? We all have constraints. They can help you work within your constraints to do what is the low-hanging fruit, let's say, right? So maybe some things are going to be more impactful than others. You just have to prioritize based on those constraints. So you're right, and I don't know that there's a good answer, right? If you can afford an internal CISO, then you should do that. That's always your best course of action. They're going to have the best lay of the land, the best understanding of the strategy. However, again, there are a couple of things that have come down from the large enterprise that are now filtering down to the small business. As an example, I mentioned the whitelisting. That used to be really hard to do. Now, common things like QuickBooks, your Microsoft Office, can automatically be whitelisted, so you don't have to put in as much work, right? So a lot of the work has been taken out of that equation for small business. Another good example of this is you can actually outsource Security Operations Center now, right? You don't necessarily need to build your own 24/7 team. You can have that outsourced to guys in Maryland that worked for the NSA, and now they're staffing that at a much lower price. So I think that some of this, thankfully, has come down and is being offered as an outsourced package that can help you build those gaps, or bridge those gaps without a big expense that you need to do previously. Hopefully that answers your question.
We're going to allow one last question back there, and then we'll be moving.
How do you measure ROI? Because to justify these investments, no one ever seems to have the budget before an attack, but
Right.
everyone has the budget after the attack.
Yeah,
How do
that's
you measure the ROI to justify the investment?
So that's the old adage, everything's working, what do I pay you for? Everything's not working, what do I pay you for, right? It's hard. I don't know that there's a true ROI in security, except I will say this. With these new regulations like HIPAA, high trust, CMMC, right? I am seeing companies that use it as a competitive advantage. In other words, they're going to actually say, hey, we're meeting these requirements. We're able to do this. We have the team in place. And they actually do use it as sort of a marketing and strategic advantage. I don't know that there's true ROI, but obviously there's certainly going to be a huge cost if you don't pay up. I don't have a great answer, but again, they are using it strategically to show that they're taking this seriously. So perhaps that's an answer for you.
That was great. Thank you so
Thanks.
much, Josh. Thank you for addressing our concerns on the topic and showing us the way forward.